Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalists of Cleveland, Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland Sunday morning community forum. We have a very interesting forum this morning. It's entitled Mass Incarceration, Judges and Reentry, What's Coming? And we have an excellent panel of speakers, Erica Anthony and Crystal Bryant. And to introduce our speakers and the topic, I'm going to turn this over to Susan Alcorn, our Sunday morning community forum chairperson. Susan?
Hi, and thank you for joining us this morning. We wish we could see all of you in person, but that's not possible now. And as you know, we have a very strong tradition of community forums in our congregation, way over 25 years. We've met to discuss the topics of the day that really need addressing. And mass incarceration is certainly one of these top priority issues. Nationally, 1 in every 4 African Americans has some kind of prison or record. And you saw the picture there before we began with the statistics here in Ohio. 45,000 inmates and that are African American, and only 14% of our population. So we are missing our moderator this morning. Richard Andrews is having difficulty with getting into our Zoom discussion here this morning. And I don't have all the technical information here to introduce Crystal Bryant and Erica Anthony, but I can tell you they are extremely well qualified. Crystal Bryant heads the reentry program here countywide in Cuyahoga County. And Erica Anthony is the executive director of the Ohio Transformation Fund. And both of them have very wide experience in dealing with incarceration and the reentry issues and the issues that lead up to incarceration and all of the dimensions of what we are talking about today. We just couldn't get that. It's not possible to get more experienced people here that really know what happens, what can be done, what the future might bring, and how we can work together on this issue. So I want to turn this over to both of these individuals and let the conversation begin. And again, thank all of you for joining us. This is a very important issue that we do need to work together on. Thank you.
Susan, one more thing. Richard is here.
Oh, okay. I will now turn this over to Richard, who can do a formal introduction, and I want to thank him in advance. Thank you both for joining us. Can Richard join us verbally or via picture?
Okay, can you hear? All right.
We can hear you, Richard.
All right, all of a sudden I'm on 2 devices. So can I be heard now? All right, I apologize, but let me get straight to the meat of it. As Susan has said, this is a vital topic. 45% of the 45,000 Ohio inmates are African-American, even though the state is only 14% Black, and nationwide, 37 the disproportion of inmates nationwide is the same. And so we have to discuss this today. Erica Anthony and Crystal Bryant. Erica is the executive director of the Ohio Transformation Fund, which is a collaborative developed and supported by national and local funders. They focus on transforming the justice system. And Erica has been a long time activist, both professionally and in her personal life. She's founded both Cleveland Votes, co-founded Cleveland Votes and Hack Cleveland. And she's got degrees from the Pennsylvania State University in psychology and a master's of public administration from Cleveland State. Crystal is, works for the county as the director of the reentry program. And she has a staff of 5 and is actively and daily involved in trying to deal with the thousands of returning citizens who come back to Cuyahoga County alone every year. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome them and turn it over to them. And ladies, I don't know which one of you wants to go first, but go right ahead.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for this virtual forum. Crystal and I are truly honored to be with you all today. Before I begin my remarks, I just like to extend my appreciation to this congregation for creating space for this discussion. As you heard from both Susan and Richard, this is an incredibly complex and challenging problem, not just for Ohio, but for our nation. So Crystal and I are going to talk a little bit about that today. Also, it's no secret that I'm a huge fan of Susan Alcorn, so pretty much show up wherever she tells me to go. So I would like to have special thank you to her and all those that helped to make this forum possible today. Today, Crystal and I are here to talk about mass incarceration, judges, and reentry. These are a couple of pillars under the larger issue of mass criminalization. Mass criminalization is a heavy topic, to say the least. And of course, our time here today won't allow us to dig into all of its complexity. But we hope that we can illuminate some of the salient points that are related to this wicked problem as relates to what we can do together collectively toward a solution. So first, I want to start with a quote. Crystal knows I love Michelle Alexander, as do many others. So I want to start with a quote from her. Over the years, many have said the degree of civilization in society can be judged by entering its prisons. Today, the same can be said of our criminal injustice system, which is a mirror reflecting back to us who we really are, as opposed to who we tell ourselves. Ms. Alexander shared this quote last summer in a New York Times op-ed, and the op-ed was entitled, "America, This Is Our Chance." By June of last year, all of us, were contending with a global public health crisis that we are still dealing with today. There was continual disregard for Black lives, a crumbling economy, and countless protests, both here in the United States as well as globally. On top of that, we had a looming presidential election. So just to contextualize, when she released this op-ed, what was happening? Where were we as a state, as a nation, as a country, as a community? After reading her op-ed, I am an ultimate optimist, to say the least. I try my best to lead with gratitude and hopefulness. So I wanted to believe her. I want to believe her as I sit before all of you today, that this is in fact our chance. However, it's hard to get past our nation's history and the current state of affairs that are before us. The racial reckoning we've experienced and witnessed is predicated upon a long, torrid history of mass criminalization in America. Just to provide a couple of statistics, both Susan and Richard started with a few. Currently, there are 2.3 million Americans in a prison or jail. The US has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its prisoners. 1 in 3 Black men can expect to spend time in prison. There are 2.7 million children, minors, that have an incarcerated parent in the United States. The imprisonment rate has grown by more than 400% since the 1970s. So that's my lifetime. Not that I'm gonna tell y'all my exact age, but that is my lifetime, that it has grown 400%. Americans' incarceration crisis is an ultimate example of politics and really the underlying culture of dehumanization that we must end together. We criminalize everything from poverty to needlessly separating children from their parents, destabilizing, destroying families, even entire neighborhoods in this process. The scale and the severity of America's criminal injustice system is unique to us as a nation and is unmatched by any other developing nation in this world. This crisis disproportionately impacts people of color. It costs our nation, the United States, $80 billion annually in law enforcement spending. Between 55 and 60 billion, with a B, dollars are lost to our GDP. So what does this look like here in Ohio? Ohio's incarceration rate is 679 per 100,000 people. That includes our prisons, our local jails, our immigration detention centers, as well as our juvenile justice facilities. According to ODRC, Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, they produce a monthly fact sheet. The last one that's available right now to the public is from December 2020. As of December 2020, there are 44,047 persons incarcerated in our 27 state-funded adult prisons. The average cost per incarcerated person is about $83 a day and $1.4 billion annually. ODRC's projected FY21 budget is just over $2 billion annually. Ohio state prisons have seen a steady increase since the 1970s, as I stated before. There was a very, very short period in the early 2000s where we saw a slight dip, and there's a number of key legislation bills that passed around that time that reflect why there was a slight dip. However, we're starting to see an uptick again. So as I reflect back to Ms. Alexander's quote, I constantly am asking myself, is this our chance? Where do we go from here? But I remain hopeful, and hopefully you all will as well. So as Richard said, and Susan, I currently have the honor of serving as the executive director of the Ohio Transformation Fund. It is a collaborative fund that's been here in Ohio since 2015. It actually started at a time of what we have experienced in the last year or so. In 2015, as a nation, we were contending with the horrific murders of individuals like Michael Brown, John Crawford, just a year before here in our own city, Tamir Rice. So there was a lot of tension in our communities, and funders and practitioners and advocates came together to say, we need to do more, we need to invest more in organizations that are seeking to advance systemic change as it pertains to criminal justice and the larger mass criminalization issue here in Ohio. So for us, by aligning our resources strategically, we aim to strengthen practitioners working in the field, address some of the key capacity gaps that folks are facing, and engage, again, not just national funders, but Ohio funders, both as investors, but also as thought partners and strategic alignment partners to advance change here in the state of Ohio. Our theory of change is pretty simple. We acknowledge that policy reform alone will not dismantle the deeply embedded systemic inequities in our state. And also community organizing and civic engagement alone cannot leverage the lasting change needed without a highly capable policy advocacy structure that promotes and monitors the statutory, policy, budgetary, and other forms of reform for our state. So for us, it's really important for us to focus on systemic change. Systemic change is possible when policy changes are driven by a supported base of critically conscious community members, such as yourself, who have experienced the impact of the criminal legal system. So it's a both and. We need to have broader masses of individuals more knowledgeable about this issue, but we also need to honor and uphold those that have had the direct lived experience of incarceration, whether it's the individual, their spouse, their children, their family, even their neighbor. We really need to honor that in the co-creation of what our solutions look like. So for us, we invest directly, as I said, in organizations that are seeking to impact systemic change in community organizing, public policy, as well as electoral engagement and mobilization. Obviously, today won't allow time to get into all the details of the type of organizations that we invest in, but I'll say broadly, our public policy agenda on the statewide scale is around COVID and decarceration, which is still a pressing issue here in the state of Ohio. Drug sentencing reform. We're looking at things related to limiting or ending death penalty, state level bail reform, as well as state level parole reform. And we're starting conversations around divest invest strategies as it pertains to police transformation. That's a lot. I need to take a breath myself because it's an overwhelming topic. But yeah, it's a lot to process, especially on a bright and early Sunday morning. The issues of mass incarceration and mass criminalization impact each and every one of us. Therefore, we believe it's incumbent for all of us to co-create the solutions. So today, as you hear myself and in a moment, Crystal, I implore each of you to stretch your imaginations, commit to the impossible, and join us in seeking liberation for those that may not have the voice to do so. I will end with another quote because guess what? I like quotes. This one is from James Baldwin, an essay from James Baldwin. I think it was in 1962, if I'm not mistaken. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. Thank you again for your time today. It is with my great pleasure that I turn it over to my dear sister in justice, Crystal Bryant.
Thank you, Mrs. Anthony. I love to echo the sentiments of Erica. Thank you all for putting this panel together this morning and for being present with us. It is not easy to be present at 9:30 a.m. to talk about something as difficult and as large of an issue as mass incarceration. So I'm going to carry a smile because that's what I know how to do, even though we're talking about something really, really difficult and daunting as mass incarceration. So my name is Crystal Bryant. I serve as our director of the Cuyahoga County Office of Reentry. One of the things for me that's really important that you all know is that reentry is not a program. Language is very important. I'm an attorney, and so they tell you and teach you very early on, be really, really careful with your wording. And so one of the reasons why I want to highlight the fact that reentry is not a program for us is we get a lot of calls about how do we connect individuals, et cetera, when really our primary function in Cuyahoga County is to serve as a funder. We are a convener, we are a thought leader, we are an influencer, and we are all things reentry. And so we support our community and the wonderful services and programs that they uplift and they provide for the constituents of Cuyahoga County. But that's not all that we do. One of the biggest things that we do is we're an infrastructure builder. It's really, really important in that space of infrastructure building and having a convener. And Cuyahoga County, which is one of the 88 counties throughout the state of Ohio, I like to say sometimes we are resource rich. Now, I might be shunned for saying that, but the reality of it is this: we can always use more, but in comparison to some of the other 87 counties, we have a lot more resources. And so what we have to learn how to do is be efficient with our resources, collaborate more effectively. That way we can scale and have a greater impact. And the missing link to some of this work is having someone who set an infrastructure for you in place and serve as convener for you in a space where you're not competing and you're bringing everyone together so you can stop the duplicative efforts. You can locate where the gaps are in services and programs, and you can figure out at a macro and micro level, how do you touch and concern all of these issues? So a lot of the former work or prior work done by my predecessors in the Office of Reentry has focused on what programs were missing from our wonderful county. And so while I picked up that ball and continued with that space, I've also chosen to look at things slightly a little bit more differently for me. Reentry for me is personal. I've had a formerly incarcerated brother. I've had a formerly incarcerated child's father. I have watched over 30 plus Black men die before I was even in the 12th grade that were really personal and close friends in my neighborhood. And so at this point, I had to choose to do something different if I wanted to produce a different result, an outcome. And so the minute I touched this space 4 years ago as the director, I chose to now look at reentry as the definition, which would be the transition of individuals coming home from incarceration Because if we look at it as a definition of reentry, then I'll choose to focus on programs only. Instead, I wanted to be able to influence and penetrate systems through our work, bring people together in terms of building coalition, being able to impact things at both a macro and micro scale, inclusive of policy, because we can change nothing if we don't change policy, practice, and laws. And so to do that, we've chosen to focus on a few areas through our Greater Cleveland Reentry Leadership Coalition. The coalition for Cuyahoga County actually existed before the Office of Reentry, which is an interesting fact. It's also very interesting and great to uplift the fact that Cuyahoga County was the first government office of reentry in the state of Ohio. And those that have become after actually mimicked a lot of the work of Sandra Bazell and Luis Vasquez in their former capacities before I took this role on. So the Leadership Coalition has been in existence for about 13 years now. It's made up of government stakeholders, grassroots leaders, nonprofit leaders, and just fighters, fierce fighters who want to see something done and who are committed to change. And so that is how we're able to execute the body of the work that we do. Because as a primary funding agency, we have limited resources that can only stretch so far. But when you pull your resources together and you fund the things that do not exist or that can't be scaled or hasn't been scaled yet, you'll be amazed at what you're able to create for sustainable change. So our leadership coalition consists of about 5 subcommittees. We have a data subcommittee. One huge thing that's missing here. So both Richard and Erica gave you a lot of figures, but if you notice, there were no figures that were specific to Cuyahoga County. That's a huge missing link. So we have national, we have state, and it's like, what do you have at your county level? We're like, so we're attempting to make an effort to do something about that and rally around those who are in the space of data and research and get some local figures so we can make data informed decisions moving forward. We have a service system subcommittee. So we talked about like the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing, and people have the best intent in reentry. That's what I love about it. People are really passionate and really want to serve those who are coming home with all these challenges. But if someone wants to create a workforce program, but there's like one that's 5 minutes down the street, that may be a waste of resources when you can come together and create something more powerful when you align your services. So service system allows our entire reentry service system to come together, meet on a monthly basis, have North Star Reentry Resource Center as its focal point, bring the brick and mortar space that it is, and talk about, what each entity is offering, how they can collaborate together, how they can create pipelines of referral systems, et cetera. And then we have something called a housing subcommittee or community development. Erica and Elizabeth Richards lead that subcommittee. So they call it the Justice Housing Work Group. And we can talk a little bit more about some of their projects when we get later on in this conversation. But the genesis behind this is the ability to house all formerly incarcerated persons who are homeless or who have unstable housing. So it sounds like a heavy lift, but if you don't think big and have big goals, then what are you here for as a public servant? We also have a workforce economic development subcommittee. And then last but not least, we have a policy and advocacy subcommittee, so we can kind of tackle across those various subsystems, what are the issues in policy that prevent us from moving forward, and then what we can create in white paper advocacy and policy areas that allow us to systematically change these processes for sustainability in the long term so that people can thrive and advance when they return home and not just return. So I think I've given a whole bunch in that space as fast as I could because we don't have a lot of time today. But I also want to just quickly kind of uplift some of our programs that we do fund, which is really, really important to look at where Cuyahoga County as a government is making its investments through our CEO and through my director, David Merriman. So here is some of the projects that we've been able to move. Moving from a programmatic focus and also thinking about how do we fill gaps in spaces. That's really important for you to know. So I have a $3 million budget, which is not huge when you think about the area of reentry, how large it is, and the number of people that are returning home. But what I want you to wrap, or what I ask you to wrap your mind around is the fact that these are human beings. And typically in government, what do we do with human beings? We compartmentalize them. I have my homeless population, I have my seniors, I have a workforce, but in reality, these are just people with multiple issues. And the issues and concerns that they're plagued with is a direct result of mass incarceration, capitalism, and a lack of equity. This is all just a symptom of racism and poverty and capitalism. So if you bring those things together, without an Office of Reentry that existed for about 12 or 13 years ago, some of these individuals will be served through my sister agencies in this system irregardless. So that's why we've chosen to look at a smaller budget to uplift and do things that aren't already being done in Cuyahoga County, and think about how we can streamline and bring projects together up to scale so that everyone can be served. So not just our people in our local incarceration project like our jail or our community-based correctional facility, but also DRC, or even the individuals who never even touched a prison, which could be those who are on probation. So they're directly impacted, but probation keeps you, it gives you a second chance or opportunity before you ever hit a correctional institution to try to change and put forth some efforts in that space. So one of the things that we've done, which is new, is called Achieve Staffing. Achieve Staffing is a staffing agency, but is specifically for formerly incarcerated persons. So we have tons of workforce programs. They do amazing work. But what's missing is that sometimes and often people may have touched 5, 6, 7 workforce programs throughout the time of them recidivating, but they still can't find a job. And sometimes you don't need a program. Sometimes people are really, really discouraged by being asked to do another program. Well, what they need today is money to feed their family. And so Achieve Staffing is a partnership with Towards Employment and the Cuyahoga County Office of Reentry to create this very unique opportunity. So there are some differences in this particular staffing agency, but I have a limited amount of time, so I'll keep it there. I'll keep it brief. We also implemented something called a Second Chance Legal Clinic in a partnership with Case Western Reserve University's law school, rather. And so the purpose of this legal clinic is they touch things dealing with family law, they touch things dealing with employment and housing. So if it's evictions, if it's credit reporting, debt negotiation, if it's pardons, they work on a multitude of issues, CQEs, et cetera. And right now the office is serving in a space of creating this 365 model with the Public Defender's Office and Legal Aid, where we have one referral process. It's almost like a no wrong door process to make sure no clients are being left behind in this space for legal services, including driver's license reinstatement, child support modification, et cetera. So look for a flyer, make sure you check out our website, sign up for our newsletter, because there is where most of the information lies if you'd like it to get out to the community in a larger space. One of the other newer projects that we have is we're issuing an RFP for small business development for formerly incarcerated persons. When we talk about this issue of equity, there is no way we can ever get ahead as a people, Black and brown, if you don't generate wealth, if you don't own anything and you're only the worker. And so as you can see, if we are disparately touched by the criminal justice system, that means we're disparately impacted by things such as being able to build businesses or have loans, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're putting out an RFP so that those who are formerly incarcerated get an opportunity for growth, get an opportunity to advance in a different way. A lot of them are very interested and have great entrepreneurial skills. And so this is something that will be new to us, and we're really, really excited about in Cuyahoga County. We also have some really, really good partners who we work with and we continue to work with, even though we're no longer funding them. So prior to us starting this call today, we talked a little bit about one of our older partners, Lutheran Metropolitan Ministries. They have an amazing program which the Office of Reentry used to fund. It's a social enterprise model. It's called Chopping for Change. And with that Chopping for Change program, women who are actually incarcerated, actually serving their sentence right now in Northeast Pre-Release Center, get to leave out during the day and go to LMM and work in a culinary arts program. So they're skilled laborers. They have actual contracts. They're providing meals for individuals. And at the end of this program, they receive their Safe Serve certification. And I believe LMM is now elevating that platform and they're able to offer an associate's degree for these women who have longer sentences. 90 days pre-release, they're able to work in our Virgil E. Brown kitchen. It's called the Second Chance Cafe, where they'll begin to have a second chance bank account and prepare for their transition home. So COVID has put a small dent in some of those things, but we work with some partners and Secures Foundation, and they were able to get tablets and continue with their programming. So that's just some of the things that our county dollars are invested in and uplift in terms of reentry. So it's a huge, huge issue. We are working diligently at penetrating these various systems and all these different spaces. We certainly could use you all as partners. Our Leadership Coalition meetings, as well as subcommittees meetings, are posted publicly at the Cuyahoga County Office of Reentry, and we would love to have you all join us in action. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for those excellent presentations. I'm sure that all of our attendees today really appreciate both the the information and the knowledge, and certainly we picked up on the passion that you bring to this issue. So you've given us a lot to think about, and hopefully sometime in the Q&A, you may be able to indicate what we as citizens can do to support your work and to help address this problem. It's now time for questions and answers, and so I'm going to give some instructions, which our learned audience has already picked up on because we've got several questions in queue. But basically, viewers can look for the Q&A button and type in your questions and comments. The button can be located either at the bottom, top, or either side of your smartphone, tablet, or computer. If your question is chosen, you'll be recognized by your first name unless you hit the anonymous button. And while we're talking about the computer buttons, I also want to mention the chat box. If you're not already on the forum list and you'd like email reminders of future forums, please just give us your email and your name in the chat box. I'm now pleased to turn this session portion over to Debbie Wright and Laura Imbornoni, who are members of our forum committee and chairs of the Q&A session. They're going to choose the questions that you've typed in via the Q&A button. So, ladies, it's on you.
Thank you, Richard. And first of all, Erica and Crystal, thank you so much for talking with us about this important topic today. I want to say it's got to be really, really hard work. And I appreciate so much that you're doing this for us in Cuyahoga County and trying to assist people as they re-enter our community. Thank you so much. So I have two questions, and then Debbie will have a question after that. The first question is this: could we actually save money in our state and nationally by incarcerating fewer people and instead creating and funding more programs for education and support that uplift everybody?
I can
What do you
start.
think?
You want to start, Crystal?
Yeah.
Yes, emphatically yes. And Crystal could provide more specificity for than I can, but I'll just say broadly, most certainly. I know there was either a question in the chat or the Q&A about, are we relying too much on punishment? Most certainly, most certainly. We're not addressing the root cause of these issues. I'll say for me personally, I am not anti-law and order, but I am anti-abuse of law and order. And I'm anti-abuse of using systemic policies to really disenfranchise segments of our population. And I think we can be transparent here that the segment of the population we're talking about are Black people, predominantly Black people, right? And other people of color. So yes, there are a multitude of ways. And really, if we think about this as a system, I think you've probably heard Crystal and I collectively say system at least 24 times, because we're really trying to address the system. This system starts from birth. The system doesn't start at the point of an individual making contact with law enforcement. That's not when this conversation needs to start. The conversation needs to start at birth, and it needs to talk about education, housing, access to quality healthcare. I mean, the list goes on, and we have to make sure that our neighborhoods are vibrant. There's economic prosperity. There's opportunities for jobs. I mean, that's where the conversation needs to start. So if we are investing in those systems, then we have a better chance of having individuals not have contact with the criminal legal system.
So, just like my sister said, I don't really need to echo much more. I just want to give like a tangible example. It was a meme going around, if you all are, really fluent on social media, about how the typical education for a bachelor's is about $38,000 per person. How many bachelor's degrees could you get with the billions of dollars being spent in the prison system? So when we talk about, people being human beings, all people tend to think about, or funders tend to think about. And so as a funder, I'm often guilty of it too. So I have to really redirect and change the way we do business at the Office of Reentry the best I can, because we're a very small division. So we're not often highlighted for the work that we do. It's not glory work, it's grunt work. And you have to get in there and really be passionate about it. Is the fact that these are human beings. So you can't just focus on recidivism rates, right? Because that's all you hear. Well, did they recidivate? Did they get another charge? People make mistakes. And generally the way the system is set up for you to make another mistake very easily, very quickly, just for being Black. I mean, my son's turning 13 and I have to now start to give him the talks about when you drive, what you do, just because of the color of his skin, for no other reason than that. And so when you think about those types of things that we are faced with, I really try to highlight human beings want the same thing we want. You want higher education. You want to purchase a home one day. You want to have a family. You want to have, a lack of trauma or treated trauma. Those are the things that we all want. We want long health. We want wealth. So those are the things I try to highlight when I think about what are their success stories? What am I really tracking? Not just were you rearrested, right? And so in order to have those things, the investment in systems, the investment in community building, so that when you're driving down Kinsman into Chagrin, it doesn't look like you've been shell-shocked, is what's most important to me. So we reinvested those things in communities and human beings, and what we all want, or what we say we want, and what America is supposed to be, then I think we'd be in a much better position. And just like Erica, I'm not, anti-law enforcement or anti-law and order. I was a prosecutor for a bit of a time. I was a drug court case manager, so I kind of served in a space of being a probation officer in some ways, but not to abuse or neglect those roles, to really understand what public service is, and you rehabilitate where you can, and you punish where people need a consequence. But punishment has to even look differently when we think about what these things mean. Prosecution has to look differently. It's not just the criminal justice system that has to change. America has to change, which means a multitude of systems for these things to work and come together. So hopefully, you all will join us in the fight. And certainly, you're probably already working in this space if you're up at 10 o'clock in the morning listening to something that's heavy. So thank you.
Thank you. And here's a specific question from Chris. We have a number of specific questions for you too. Chris asked, where does Ohio stand concerning voter rights after incarceration? Is there active voter education and registration?
So this is like a perfect question for Erica and I. Erica and I both, take my reentry hat off for a second, co-founded an organization called Cleveland Votes. And since she is the visionary who has definitely moved it forward with our two wonderful staff members, I'll just quickly give you a snapshot. As conservative as Ohio can be, we're actually a little bit more progressive in this space. So for formerly incarcerated persons, the minute you leave prison, your right to vote is restored. All you have to do is re-register. That's it. You literally just have to re-register at your local board of elections, and you can vote if you're in a halfway house with a couple stipulations, if you are incarcerated in a jail but haven't been convicted of the crime yet, and if you're on probation, which is, remember, what keeps you from going to prison, and or parole, which is supervision after you're transitioning out of prison. So ours is actually very, very progressive in that space. There's a lot of efforts. So our office does, some ongoing things with our halfway house partners. We have some information on our website, and then Cleveland Votes as an entity gets busy. So I'll be quiet and I'll allow my beautiful sister in Justice to kind of speak on behalf of Cleveland Votes.
Sure. Thank you so much, Crystal. So I dropped a couple of resources in the chat as a quick reference. ACLU produces the Know Your Rights cards on different topics, one of which is voting with a criminal conviction. So that's just a really easy, handy thing to have at your disposal. I know with COVID, their office is closed, but I'm pretty sure you can call them and they can either mail or you can make arrangements to pick up those cards. That is something that we have on deck all the time when we're engaging in our work with Cleveland Votes, to make sure that folks know. And I think it's really important to acknowledge and highlight that is actually how Crystal and I came together, and that is how Cleveland Votes came to be. Her and I, before she was our director of the Office of Reentry, she was working at the Adams Board. I was working at Cleveland the Center for Families and Children. And her and I were co-chairing a committee around community education and community engagement. Really, really soon in that process, we identified the need to prioritize conversations around the rights of individuals with a former conviction and voting. Lots of urban myths out there. And to be fair, the laws are different state to state. So, folks admittedly, can be confused, but I'm not going to repeat what Crystal said, but I think it's just important to know that this information is critical to be communicated to both those that are either currently incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, and the broader masses, right? So back in 2010, her and I, as folks may recall, if you were here in Cuyahoga County, we were going through our government transition from Board of County Commissioners to our current structure of county executive and county council. And we used those forums, or we used the forums at that time as an opportunity to elevate this topic. So this is a topic near and dear to both Crystal and I and the whole Cleveland Votes team. We're really intentional about making sure that this is highlighted and incorporated in all the work that we do.
Sounds impressive. Question from Jim. This is stepping back a little bit. With all this focus on race, is the percentage of inmates or African Americans increasing, stable, or decreasing? You'd think people think about this a little bit.
Increasing for sure.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Increasing for sure, but the thing that is often not the soundbite is that crime is actually getting better, not our incarceration.
Right. Well, so I was aware that crime was getting better. So it's just hard to believe that the rates are getting worse. That's terrible.
Yeah, I can just share. I made reference, and maybe I didn't. The Prison Policy Initiative. I'll drop this in the chat. They're just an amazing resource on so many different fronts, but I'll specifically drop the one that talks about Ohio. So if folks have access to see this or look at it later. So before I made mention that for Ohio, our rate is 679 individuals per 100,000. And you can see in one of their charts, they do that broken down by race and ethnicity. And it's visually just, you can see the disproportion number between Black individuals as well as Hispanic and white. It's just, there's no comparison.
So focus has not changed arrest policies at this point?
No.
Okay. Here's a question from Larry regarding access to care for medical, mental health, substance abuse. I understand that some state prisons can help sign people up for Medicaid prior to release, so they have coverage, can access care immediately upon release. Do we know if all prisons do this for almost all releases? And is it possible to increase this process with local and county jails?
So I can jump in here. So Larry, you have to forgive me. I'm getting old and therefore I cannot remember what the legislation is. But there was some legislation circulating last year that kind of stuck some information in about having this happen at a local level. And it had moved on to the Senate and they were looking for testimony. So I remember myself and John Corlett having some discussions with Senator Brown's office around this and, kind of jockeying that they support this effort. I can't tell you, I don't know where that is. I definitely need to be following better. But I can tell you that at a local level, as a direct result of COVID actually happening. So there are some silver linings when you have a pandemic that touches everyone. Our state Department of Rehab and Corrections has some autonomy to do some things on their own and champion some things differently, in which they did. They have an Office of Reentry and Enterprise Services. So it doesn't work the same way our community Office of Reentries work in the varying counties, but that particular Office of Reentry does try to work with all 88 counties and those that have Office of Reentry. So they have a state Ohio leadership or coalition in which they then share information and pass it down to us. So in that long breath, I say all that to say, more recently, one of the things that they implemented is a policy change in which now 90 days pre-release, they are enrolling people in Medicaid across all of the prisons, because that's a state office for DRC. It's not a county office. And so they've chosen to take this on and spearhead this effort so that if people come home sick or if they had COVID, they are now able to continue with their efforts of getting services and making sure their health is intact afterwards. They're working directly with the managed care plans as well to kind of provide like tote bags and backpacks of necessities, as well as masks and things, sanitizer, soap. They're now receiving those things at release. They're also now, they have a pilot where they're receiving cell phones. So like the track phones, which they would call Obama phones under the former administration, they're now implementing that as well in service with the 5 managed care plans. So I can tell you those things are happening as a direct result of COVID. I need to follow up on that law. I do have policy staff, so it's a small but mighty team. So when I follow up to see where we are with that, it would be great though if we could get it into law, because as you know, with practices, with new leadership, that can often change and swing. But right now, that is something that they're doing. There was some efforts to have it happen at the county jail as well. So there is a health policy analyst expert that we have. Her name is Sabrina Roberts, who serves Cuyahoga County well. She's an amazing administrator. She works with Director Gibson, who is the new warden for Cuyahoga County Jail. And we had a pilot project where they were doing that with individuals. And then for the behavioral health piece, Recovery Resources goes inside of the jail and works with people who are transitioning out in our local community. I'll tell you that with COVID, those things have had to stop for the behavioral health piece. They had to focus immediately on the need of the pandemic and ensuring safety. But as things kind of get back to normalcy, and Erica mentioned a little bit what she's working on in terms of emergency management when we have these pandemics and incarceration, I think that we'll be in a different space to kind of, take a look at again, what can you offer pre-release as people transition out? But short, I guess that's a long but short answer. Yes, it's being offered.
I'd like to read a very interesting question from Lori. What barriers exist to encourage police to do more? Oops, I lost it for a moment.
That was my fault. Do more that's my fault.
So I'm going to just try to do it from memory as best I can. Cite and release opportunities for police to offer that as an option rather than arresting people. Do you understand that question?
I think so.
I can actually read it, Laura.
Okay, good.
Barriers exist to encouraging police to do more to cite and release rather than arrest for nonviolent allegations. There are so many police departments and policies.
I can attempt to answer this question. It is a very, very complex question. So first, I think we need to have an honest conversation about public safety and law enforcement in this country. So again, we keep going back to, we want to start, if it's a 10-step process, often what we see in our nation, in our communities, is like, let's start at step 6. And it's like, but what about 1 through 5, right? It's like, we haven't talked about that. So I just want to be really clear about and vulnerable about where I am in my own learning journey, right? Prior to coming to OTF, I would say most of my work broadly was around reentry and advancing policy change for, better criminal legal system. I have not spent a tremendous amount of my career, my work in policing and policing reform. So I'm very much in this active journey as a professional. Now I have personal opinions and things that I've done on my own. So that's just kind of the backdrop that I acknowledge that I'm very much learning. But I think in my learning, what I've identified is that we need to have a conversation. There's both the human factor, as Crystal has said a multitude of times. There's just the basic understanding of like, what is community and what do we need and what do we want for our community? And then there's how do we govern, right? And policing is one form of governing. I think we as a nation have sorely limited our imagination and the possibility of what governing means. And that has changed over the years, right? So I can say specifically about like the block I grew up in Long Island, New York, it was governed not by police, but by those neighbors who knew that if Mr. and Mrs. Ford was not home, they were the eyes and ears to Erica and her siblings and the other kids on the block. It was governed and it was governed well. And I had tremendous respect for the men and women who I respected as my elders and as my neighbors on my block, right? So it's a different type of conversation that where we need to start the conversation is not at the point of should a police officer cite or not cite. there is countless research. I can refer, countless research of where, we should be doing better as it pertains to that. But I think the conversation really needs to start about what is safety, what is community, and what does that look like, and honor and recognize that that looks different for different individuals. And there's a deep, deep history as it pertains to policing in this country going back to slavery, right? So we have to reckon with some of this history, some of the current state of affairs before we can really have a thoughtful conversation. But if we want to get down to brass tacks, we're spending tremendous billions and billions of dollars on law enforcement, and we're not spending those billions on education, healthcare, and other things that can actually improve our communities.
Here's a follow-up to that. Erica, I couldn't help noticing you said it was governed. It was governed really well by the elders in the community. To what extent do those communities still exist in Cuyahoga County? Is that support system still present?
So just to be clear, I didn't grow up in Cuyahoga County, so I can't say with specificity, if that exists. I can only, speak to my personal experience growing up in New York. But I think it does. But I think it's also, we often, lead with this lens of othering instead of belonging, right? We want to other individuals and judge in some ways what they have and what they don't have, right? And that's not the lens and the perspective, at least, that I try to lead with, and really understand and value what individual humans mean and what I appreciate about their value. So I think it's, again, going back to, we have to collectively decide what is safety. Because I know maybe 2 months after George Floyd was killed, I was pulled over a couple blocks from my house, and I was not feeling safe when I got pulled over as a Black woman in America. I know my husband, as a Black man in America, has been pulled over, and I know he would call me and tell me exactly where he was, and I didn't feel safe for him, right? So we have to honor and respect that people have different definitions of what safety is. Now, I had no reason to feel unsafe on paper, like logically, right? It's not my fault that my tag was expired, right? Because we're in COVID and da-da-da, right? So I yes, I was violating a law, but there was a protection for that law temporarily back in the spring because of COVID, right? So legitimately, logically, I should have had no reason to be fearful, but I was. And that's the reality, and we have to honor that.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I think Bonnie has a really interesting question. She asks, are there services for citizens who are re-entering regarding the trauma, PTSD they may have encountered while being in prison or jail?
Well, Bonnie, that's a great question. Actually, it's one of the office's new services. I didn't get a chance to go through every one. It's called Post-Incarceration Trauma Services, and it's implemented through Community Assessment and Treatment Services at 8401 Broadway Avenue. So yes, that is a DSM-5 diagnosis. People don't realize that often, if this was your first term you've ever did in prison, the prison is a very violent place. It makes you someone that maybe you weren't before, and to come home and have to then deal with society and be quote unquote normal is very traumatizing. And now you come home with the record. And so you're re-traumatized by the fact that opportunities you had before are no longer availed to you and people treat you differently. And you also just face the traumas of how you have to live as an inmate, as a slave. Is very different from living in community. So we had one young man at one of our annual meetings one time get on the platform and elevate his story. He worked for the reentry office in Summit County, but he did a 10-year stint in prison. And he talked about how he would eat amongst his family and still guard his food as if he was incarcerated, or how he would still use shower shoes when he would take his shower. And his family would joke at him, but he really realized he had some serious issues around protection and safety now that he was back home in a space. So we realized it was something that needed to be uplifted. Again, it's at a small scale. So everything that we do in our office is usually at a small scale until we can find additional resources or different additional allies to uplift it. But it does exist. And if you need more information, our office would be happy to share.
Question from Anne. She asks you, Crystal, could you talk a little bit about ways that we can help? You mentioned attending meetings. What needs do you have that we could fill as citizens, I guess?
So the one thing I believe in, Anne, is that I empower strategists and other leaders. I think too many times we have a glory role in government and you think, I can fix it all. That's impossible and ridiculous, right? We all have to fix it all. And so what I continue to promote for individuals to do is the lane that you're in, be great in it. We need you. I mean, when I say every single system has to change in order to make any real efforts, so think about what system and what space you work in. If it's workforce, if it's funding, if it's voting, whatever it is, you bring it to the table. We can put you underneath one of the committees, and we want you to glow and grow in your leadership and do what it is that you do. And how we work as an office in terms of strategy is making sure we eliminate and bulldoze any barriers before you that's going to stop you from being successful. So if you call me, you tell me what talents you have, believe me, I'll figure out how to leverage them.
Thank you. Laura, do you have one?
I do, actually. I'm wondering what inspires you the most about your work? What are the types of situations, perhaps progress that's been made? What do you see as the most inspiring aspects of what you and the people who work in your agencies do?
I can start. First and foremost, I'm inspired every day by Crystal. So she is just an amazing, amazing leader. To see the tremendous growth that the Office of Reentry has taken over the last couple of years is really a testament to her and her leadership and her passion. I think where I am inspired beyond Crystal is really the folks that are connected to this work in the most intimate ways. You know, I will say that in this new role with OTF, it is very different than the roles I've had before. So I'm not directly in the work day to day because I'm serving as a funder and a strategy partner. And I have my moments where I'm just like, oh, I don't know if this is my lane because I kind of want to be with my people, right? But I am inspired by amazing grantee partners that we have and fearless advocates. We have a small strategy table of some anchor grantees that are doing and advancing our state policy agenda. And then we have this large network called the Transforming Justice Network of fearless advocates and activists across the state of Ohio that we convene right now, of course, virtually on a regular basis, and I'm consistently inspired there. And then way back in the day when I was doing more work directly in our state prisons, I will say that, you know, I have befriended a number of incarcerated persons that I am still friends with now for those that have been released. And I think just the vulnerability and the honesty that they have shared their experience through life, not just their incarcerated life, but through life, continues to inspire me as well.
So it's probably not a secret that Erica and I are in love with each other. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm often inspired by my sister who builds a village around me when I don't have one, when it's really difficult to go another day because you don't feel like you've even touched a quarter of what it is you need to do for our community. But in addition to always feeling uplifted and inspired by Erica, I had the honor of participating in a fellowship, a national fellowship that is ran for and by directly impacted persons in the criminal justice system. It's called Just Leadership. It is based out of New York, started by Glenn Martin, currently ran by Deanna Hoskins. All these formerly incarcerated persons are freaking amazing. They own $1 million businesses. Some of them were the first to ever be employed by the federal government. I mean, you name it, they do it. And when I got a chance to be in that fellow, you know, I couldn't complain anymore about whatever I was facing here because they have even more bricks stacked against them and they've been able to burst through them. So every time I participated in, and I still get to pour into other fellows through training in just leadership and alumni engagement, I often feel inspired. I'm also inspired by the people who are in my neighborhood. I mean, at heart, I'm just a neighborhood girl. I'm from East Cleveland, Ohio. All my friends a lot of them are still in East Cleveland. They haven't moved far outside of it. And so when I see another murder, now though, it's our children. So now it's my friends' kids who might have got killed or shot or in a gang. Those things inspire me because it tells me I'm not doing enough. And I have to keep going. And when I'm exhausted, when I think, you know, I could have did something else. No, you can't. This is God's calling for you and you have to move it forward or at least build a bridge so someone else can come in and elevate something that changes the world. So thank you for that question.
Even among an anonymous attendee asks, even among progressives, there's often a perception that people are incarcerated for a reason and should not be released to protect their lives during the pandemic. or maybe just have less prison sentences, I guess. What can we do as a community to advocate for decarceration?
Yeah, so I actually just dropped a link in. So Crystal made reference to Just Leadership. As she indicated, they're a national organization. We're a huge fan of their current executive director. She's actually a native Ohioan from Cincinnati, who at the time was doing amazing work down in Southwest Ohio, and then now leads this organization. So through obviously the partnerships with the Office of Reentry, myself, and a few others, we were made aware of a campaign called Just Us that Just Leadership is leading. We, for the last couple of months, have been working with them to sort of customize what this campaign looks like for Ohio. But the crux of the campaign is really beyond this current crisis that we're experiencing right now with COVID, but thinking about any future, hopefully knock on wood, no other future things are coming, but any future natural disasters or crises that we can't plan for, and to make sure that we as a state have emergency management plans in place to protect individuals. When I was first made aware of this, I'll be straight up, I didn't know anything about emergency management planning. I mean, I knew about it theoretically, but I have not worked specifically in this area. And the example that Deanna provided that made it really crystal clear for me was that when New Orleans experienced Hurricane Katrina, they had emergency management plans in place for animals, but not for the humans. It was like, when she said that, I'm like, wow. So learn more about that campaign there. And then Ohio, and specifically here in Ohio, Ohio Transformation Fund, we're kind of recoining it Compassion Over Cages, but it's very much connected to this. And we just actually retained a nonprofit organization that we'll be working with to help lead that campaign. We have an active job posting that I can drop in the chat here in a moment for a campaign manager for that. So that is one of many things that we can do right now, specifically around decarceration. And I will say that pretty early on, I would say more at the local level than at the state prison level, there were some amazing changes made. And I think for us as advocates, the question was like, well, if y'all can do this now during COVID, you can keep this, right? You can retain this, you can maintain this, right? So I remember hearing Justice O'Connor, talk about whatever, I think $5 million of infrastructure technology that was invested in our courts across the state of Ohio. And it's like, well, now that's infrastructure that's there. So, maybe we can pivot and think about having digital hearings, and someone doesn't have to take off an entire day of work if they're not a salaried employee that's lost wages for that individual, right? So I think it is imperative that we think about what modifications and changes were made as a result of COVID. And I think in many ways it was like a pilot to say, look here, we can actually modernize the ways in which we administer our criminal legal system, and we don't have to sort of maintain the sort of archaic ways of doing that.
Lori mentions that judges are an important part of this topic. What do we need to know? What do we need to know about the judges that have been appointed or elected in Cuyahoga County and in Ohio?
Sure. So I'll tackle this, and if Erica wants to jump in, feel free. So, the first thing to know is understanding the roles of anyone who is in an office and what type of autonomy and authority they have over the work. A judge is not a legislator. They're not creating policy. They're not writing law for you. They're not an executive. So they're not the president. They can't issue executive orders for you. But what they can do is oversee the courts and the fairness of law. And so when you think about the issue of reentry, one of the other, I would really strongly suggest you guys check out Just Leadership. One of their campaigns, when you think about decarceration, is where the numbers coming from in terms of incarceration. And a lot of it is technical violations, right? So we talked a little bit about being on probation, and probation comes with conditions. It has stipulations in which you cannot violate. So let's say you get, I don't know, a new traffic offense. Technically, any new offense could result in a violation. And if you have a violation, you are eligible to be sent back to a correctional institution to serve out the rest of your sentence or to serve the sentence that you never did because you were out on probation. So one of the things you want to look at is check out a judge's record in terms of how they sentence, how many people they send back for technical violations, instead of offering community supports like a community-based correctional facility or a halfway house where you're still incarcerated in local incarceration, but you have the ability to still live in your community, work in your community, and not lose those supportive efforts like you would if you are incarcerated in a state institution. You also want to check out the support of judges for any specialized dockets. So we talked a little bit about, well, maybe actually we didn't know here, Reentry Court, which is led by the Honorable Judge Nancy Russo, and has been for over 10 years at this point. So she handles those who apply for a judicial release. If you can't afford legal services, it would be a motion you would file. But if you can't, she allows it to be a very easy, accessible way for those in the state prison system who would like to try to come home early and restart their lives. So it's just an application process with her. She can only take upwards of 80 people a year. So it would be great if her court could be expanded. But look at those motions and how they handle judicial releases. Look at, her motto and how she handles individuals in terms of the wraparound support she tries to provide in reentry court and that specialized docket and in that manner. You also want to look at how people treat offenders actually in the courtroom before sentencing. Do they have respect for people? Do they treat them as human beings? So there was a podcast where people were live and showcasing people actually in court, how they speak to people. Do they talk to people with respect? So you can get a firsthand view at what it's like to be a part of the court system. And judges are human beings too. So with all due respect, people make mistakes, but some things are unacceptable in public service. And you have to figure out as a voter, what's acceptable to you? What type of people do you want with that kind of autonomy and power over laws and people that are actually implementing laws on a daily basis? So those are the kind of things you want to look at. And just again, remember, what people have power over, right? So a common pleas level are those who are in charge of anything with a felony, right? And then you have your municipal court judges, which are in charge and control over things with misdemeanors. There are tons of misdemeanors on the book. You may be surprised at what's the misdemeanor beyond traffic offenses and DUIs, but nonetheless, those are things that are a little bit least restrictive. They could be something as small as a loud music ticket. But either way, people put people on probation for these things. Probation has conditions. That means I have to, leave work sometimes to come down to court multiple times because I'm on probation and maybe I had a violation because I got a new loud music ticket. I could lose my job for that. If I only make $10 an hour, I'm already in poverty. There's tons of data that shows you need to at least make about $15 an hour to be steady here. And so if I'm already making $10 an hour and I have to use public transportation to come all the way down for court and keep missing dates and dates are rescheduled and continue, you want to really focus and hone in on, how these judges treat people, how they sentence, how they deal with judicial releases, how they deal with probation, how they deal with parole, how they look at specialized dockets. That is the control they have. And some judges really do go above and beyond their call of duty, how they interface with our probation system to make sure there are resources there and what resources the court may have that they're willing to utilize for persons to be successful in this space. So that is, what I would offer in terms of the judicial system.
So Crystal, can we contact you next time there's an election and ask you who to vote for? Because judge for yourself is not very helpful.
So there was something a while back. It may have, Erica helped me because I'm old. I can never remember anything. It was started by our Supreme Court justice in Ohio.
Judicial votes count.
Oh yeah, and I think that's kind of stopped. She was working with interns to update it. She may have not updated in the last 2 years, but it was a lot more, had a lot more content in terms of what judges supported, believed in. So maybe we can even, or have someone think about, have a group, reinvest in getting that going again, because that was a great way to really get a feel of who a judge was, as opposed to just.
Yeah, it's still there, but I will even say, when I was directly doing this work, I felt like I had more direct contact with the court. So I had some knowledge. Now, I am feeling like I actually need to contact folks like Crystal and others, because I feel that the resources are inadequate to give me the full picture of, if I'm not in this work on a day-to-day basis, I don't have necessarily the intimate knowledge of all the amazing things that Crystal noted. So I do think this is a gap in our community, even by having things like judicial votes count and judge for yourself. There needs to be, in my estimation, a heavier citizen-led effort, because also some of this is translation. Because I'll be honest, I understood about 2/3 of what Crystal said, but there's a solid 1/3 that I did not, right? Because I am not a former prosecutor. I am not an attorney, right? So I consider myself a relatively intelligent individual, but, this is very, very technical information. I think the Serial podcast, which I dropped in the chat, gave us illuminated, maybe some of what folks did not know, but I do think this is a gap that we could address in our community.
So I have a question for you from Susan. If you had $1 million to spend on keeping Cleveland's low-income African-American Latino teenagers from getting into trouble and possibly going to jail, how would you spend it? So that prevention programs, what prevention programs work?
So, so I don't think it's prevention. I think it's investing in humans. So I would, think about things like, and we actually had this in our county for a hot second, like a children's savings account, right? What are we doing to invest in individuals and families early on in that process? I think there's larger, systematic policy changes that folks more well-versed than I can speak to, like universal basic income, things around, living wage. I mean, so I think there's both policy and practice of things that can happen, but all of it requires investing early. I think housing is a huge barrier. I know Larry has dropped a couple of questions in pertaining to housing, not just for individuals with a former conviction or prior conviction, but we have a global or a national public housing problem or housing problem here in the United States, not public specifically, excuse me. So I think it's investing in the things that create and foster the ramp for success, right? Education, healthcare, stable housing, right? These are basic things, but it's really doing, it's not just thinking about an intervention, but how you can do those things early and invest early.
And then
About 2010, and I see that, Crystal is about to speak and we want her to finish what she's saying. So I'd like to say to both of you, is there any last comment? And perhaps Crystal wants to just continue the discussion.
Sure, Laura. I'll just quickly say, Erica laid out a great platform, but sometimes I know when we're speaking with people, we're speaking at such a high level, they're looking for one tangible example. If you were looking at one tangible example of what Erica is talking about on the ground running, I would check out Gann Academy, which is ran by Ted Gann, his school. His school primarily focuses on young African-American male, but it's really a wraparound approach to doing it. It's thinking about, non-traditional pathways. It's looking at opportunity and access. It's exploring things in terms of history and your birthright and really understanding what it means to be a Black man, only in a way that another Black man can teach it. I just recently came back from Ghana, so I'm really feeling like power to the people today, actually this week. And so, it's amazing to connect with where you're from. And what's often lost is the fact that even though we're from there, we still don't know much. We don't feel like we're a part of community there because that's all been taken from us, but that plays a tremendous role in who you are, how you develop here. So, if there were efforts to-
We want you here.
if there were efforts into things you can invest in immediately, take a look at, Mr. Gann and what he's done and what he's attempting to do as he expands out, because that's one tangible thing you can look at today. And just in closing, I just ask you all to, continue to have platforms like this, to openly be able to speak, to more importantly, be openly engaged in listening, and not criticizing, and just allowing people to speak from their truth, but also asking for action items, long and short term. This was created for 400 years now. It's not going to be like knocked out in a couple years because you all decided to get behind something when you were mortified by someone being murdered by an officer. It takes time to do these things, and you have to be patient and look at the short and long-term outcomes. So just please join us in the fight, continue the work that you do. And again, we're so happy you all were willing to have this conversation with us this morning.
Okay, I want to thank Erica and Crystal for sharing their rich expertise and knowledge with us this morning. I'm sure I speak for many in attendance today that this feels like it should be just part one of a continuing series of educating our community. And so thanks again for being here, Crystal and Erica, and we look forward to finding ways to support your work. Next week's forum will be on immigration, refugees, DACA, and the future. It's hard to imagine a more timely topic given the inauguration of a new president who's already begun to reverse many of the decisions of the previous administration. Our speakers will be Brian Hoffman, Executive Director of the Ohio Center for Strategic Immigration Litigation, and Patrick Kearns, Executive Director of the Refugee Response. Today's forum has been recorded and will soon be available on our Unitarian website, uucleveland.org. That's the alphabet, not the pronoun. Look for the recording of today's forum starting tomorrow in the large forum square of the website. You're especially invited to attend today's Unitarian service at 11 o'clock, which will be live streamed via YouTube. The service is based on the fourth Unitarian principle of free and responsible search for truth and meaning. To participate, go to uucleveland.org, click on the green box in the upper right-hand side of the website. That YouTube link will take you to the service. Thank you so much for joining us today. Your continued support is appreciated. We want you all to have a wonderful week, and we look forward to seeing you next Sunday at 9:30. Thank you and have a great week.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.